There's a lot of hype out there about how easy it is to communicate with the higher self through a simple ritual or a plant ceremony. But in 99% of these cases, these people are just feeding their own vanity, which belongs to the lower self. And that's because the higher self doesn't exist in you yet. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I've fully realized my higher self, but that's the whole point. This one realization has helped me further than all the new age ascension gurus out there promising access to the higher self magically through a 1 hour activation or a ayahuasca retreat. The higher self is not some ready-made thing for us to access on a whim. It's created through a sustained inner effort and purification of oneself, which means getting rid of all the negative habits and traumas, patterns, and any other senseless fears that we might have. You know, because those things actually block us from accessing the higher self. And it's true that in the grand scheme of things, spiritual evolution will happen. But as occultists, we take this evolution into our own hands and we speed up its development through inner work on ourselves. So, this is not some feel good video that's going to promise you access to your higher self after you watch it. But I will tell you what's necessary to gradually get there, because that's the path that I'm on. And I'm not a fully realized being by any means, but I've been on the path long enough to know what works and what doesn't. So in this video, I want to go over what the higher self is, why it doesn't exist in you yet, but has to be created, and what we can do to gradually start doing this. There's a common misconception that the higher self is just patiently waiting for us to call upon it whenever we want, through a 1 hour activation ceremony or by taking some plant medicine. What I mean by a higher self is not a spiritual insight or not a spiritual download, not even contacting with your guardian angel. Those things do happen, but they're temporary, whereas the attainment of the higher self is relatively permanent. When we have a spiritual insight, more often than not, it doesn't change us. It's only the beginning of the work. And it's the beginning of the work because it shows us where our flaws are and where we have to work on ourselves. But the work cannot be done for us. Spiritual insights are like trail maps for a mountain. They tell us where to go, but we have to climb the mountain ourselves. And only once we climb the entire mountain through inner work can we say that the higher self is attained. One way to understand the higher self is by looking at the lower self. If there is one negative thing about you that you could change, what would that be? Now imagine this negative thing. And if it's a physical action, then it's still too surface level. We often do things out of a deeper motive within. So I want you to go within and find out this deeper motive and imagine that you can change this about yourself. Now I want you to take this negative thing and imagine this weakness as its mirror image of strength, and that this weakness will become a strength in you. Now, take all your negative traits and all your negative habits and imagine that all of them were transformed into their mirror images of a strength. That is what the higher self is compared to the lower self. So it must be created, and it must be through the purification of one's lower habits and patterns, and it must be transmuted into the higher self. And it doesn't happen without effort. The lower self is transmuted through inner work into the higher one. Have you ever worked really hard for something, and because you did so, when you finally attained it, it was valued more by you? Some people would even go as far as to say that nothing easy is really worth doing, right? So we can see this universal law at play when it comes to the work it takes in attaining the higher self. See, when we're children, we don't have any bad habits, but we also don't have a developed sense of self or ego, so we can't take credit for that. And nature sees to it that we develop our ego and helps us do that. under normal circumstances. And because we take on this ego, we gain freedom. Freedom as individuals to think, feel, and do what we want. But in this freedom, we also now accrue the ability to sin and to err from the right path. That's why the Bible says that we must become like little children again. We must attain to the same purity that we had as little children, but now in full consciousness after the development of the ego and the self. And in order to do this, we have to purify the lower self, which is all the bad habits and patterns that were accumulated in the process of the development of the ego around the age of 18. And as nature would have it, we develop our ego at around 18, and we have the rest of our lives to purify this lower self, which means that it's much easier to accumulate bad habits than it is to transmute and to transform them into the higher self. So if the higher self could be gotten with a 1-hour activation ceremony or a plant medicine ceremony, is that really the higher self that we're striving for, that people work so hard to attain? If you've ever had a life-changing meditation or spiritual ceremony, when you got back to normal life, did it magically get rid of all your negative patterns and habits? Probably not. It may have given you insight on what to work on, but the work still remained. Now, what is the work? The lower self is made up of negative properties, and these negative properties are the result of years of repeating the same patterns and habits. These patterns and habits are in turn made up of particular thoughts, emotions, and actions. Now, some thoughts, emotions, and actions result in positive properties, while others lead to negative ones. The problem is you've been repeating the negative ones for so long that you can no longer catch yourself in the act and refrain from doing them. These perpetuate, and more often than not, they lead to other negative habits and patterns, which then over the years creates this messy web of negative properties, which we call now the lower self. So the work begins when we can take a step back and look at the individual thoughts, emotions, and actions in ourselves. First, we just look at the thoughts, emotions, and actions. Because if you truly look and you truly see them for what they are, you'll start to recognize how all your negative patterns and habits are a result of certain thoughts, emotions, and actions. And only once we really truly see them in their true light can we start to work on them. And then we start to try to control our thoughts, emotions, and actions so that we can start to move away from the negative patterns and towards more positive ones. So I have 3 exercises for you. The first one is concentration of thoughts. Once a day, for 5 minutes a day, I want you to concentrate on a simple, boring object. It doesn't matter what the object is, but it must be simple and boring. And here's the thing. When we are interested in something, we naturally have an interest and it draws up some power for us to think about that thing, and we can go on thinking about it. By thinking about a boring and simple object, we actually have to conjure up our own willpower and force to think about that object. I want you to do this every day for 1 week. The second one is controlling our actions, or what's called the willing force. For this one, I also want you to do it once a day for 5 minutes per day. I want you to do a simple but completely foreign task, something that you would never normally do. And again, by doing something simple but something that you would never do, it takes the necessity out of it, and you have to conjure up your own force and your own willpower to perform this action. I also want you to repeat this for a week, but now in addition to this exercise, you also have to do the concentration one at a different time during the day. And this third one is the objective outlook. So once a day, I want you to look at yourself from a different viewpoint. I want you to look at yourself, all your joys, all your sorrows, all your pains and frustrations, as if they belong to another person. And when we do this, we look at ourselves objectively and we start to loosen that attachment we have to our identity and our lower self. I want you to do this exercise starting from the very first week alongside the concentration exercise and the willing exercise. So you start this from the very beginning, you do it every day. Do this for as long as you can or want, but do it for at least 5 minutes. So this will be a 2-week soul exercise routine, if you will. For the first week, you're gonna do the concentration exercises once a day. And the second week, you're gonna stack on the willing exercise. And for the duration of the whole 2 weeks, you're gonna do the objective outlook every day. And by doing these exercises individually and then in combination, it kind of does double duty. Firstly, when you do these exercises, controlling of the thoughts and will, you start to bring an intention over them, an intention and willpower over them, which helps with trying to control them later on. And number two, when you do these in combinations, it starts to bring a harmony to your soul forces. And when we have a harmony between our soul forces, we can see how our negative patterns and habits are a result of the individual thoughts, emotions, and actions. And if we're consistent and develop our willpower to such an extent that we can start to control our soul forces, we can do the great occult work of transmuting the lower self into the higher one.